This week on the BackTable podcast.
As interventionalists, whether you're cardiology, gastroenterology, interventional, vascular, we all are trying to think on the fly and really using technology and devices to advance our practice, along obviously with the learned skills. If I think the listeners or viewers are thinking about innovation as being inextricably bound to commercial outlet and entrepreneurship, that's not necessarily the case. I believe that innovation really is predicated by inspiration, which is really about thinking about everything you do and really finding those opportunities to improve.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the BackTable podcast, your source for all things endovascular and otherwise minimally invasive. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and of course on BackTable.com. Before we dive into our topic today, just want to say a quick word from our sponsor, RadPad. RadPad radiation protection products, developed by physicians for physicians and clinically proven to protect during cine and digital subtraction angiography. Don't bet your health on anything less. Trust RadPad protection for all your interventions. See radpad.com for more information and contact info@radpad.com to learn more about radiation safety CME credits for you and your team. This is Bryan Hartley as your host this week. I'm a radiologist living in Silicon Valley and co-founder of an early stage device company in the pulmonary space. This is our next installment in the BackTable Innovation Series, where you will hear stories from physician innovators who are helping to shape the interventional field through health tech. We are excited about our special guest this week, Dr. David Liu. Dr. Liu is an interventional radiologist in British Columbia with an apparent endless passion for innovation. He's helped start several companies at the crossroads of digital health and medicine and is currently a scientist mentor at the Creative Destruction Lab, one of the largest seed stage tech and science-based incubators in the world. Today, we're going to hear how he leverages his technical background to find solutions to unmet needs ranging from the IR suite to elevators. Yes, elevators. With that, Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show and welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you and your audience. It's really an honor and a pleasure to spend this time with you.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. Let's dive in. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? Training background? What does your practice look like now?
Sure. Well, my current position is with the University of British Columbia, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Biomedical Engineering, which is a new school that intersects the Faculty of Medicine as well as the Faculty of Applied Sciences, working towards development of MedTech advancements, both in the physiologic as well as human device interaction space. I'm also a practicing interventional radiologist with Vancouver Imaging in Vancouver, British Columbia at Vancouver General Hospital. And that's kind of really where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, where the practical aspects of my clinical practice really give me inspiration to leverage out into the School of Biomedical Engineering.
That's awesome. So are you full-time clinical? Do you have protected time to do innovation or company work?
Sure. It's a really good question. There are a couple of intersections that I have and have had in my career. There's the clinical aspect. There's the innovation slash startup slash technology aspect and the academic aspect. And although they intertwine, my clinical practice is oriented in such a way that the clinical practice really drives the practice group. So although the practice group is a academic group, basically the time that I spend in the innovation space is outside of the confines of my clinical practice from a job career standpoint. So as a result, if you were going to kind of slice me and dice me, which is a little bit difficult to do given the synergies between all those different facets, I'm 70% clinical, and the rest of my time I spend academically or in the innovation space.
Great. Yeah, I've often found that if you're going to be involved this much, you absolutely have to have some time where you can really sit back and think and get things done on the company side.
Absolutely. I think, if you're turning and burning all the time, there's not enough time to be able to reflect of where the unmet needs are, where the opportunities are, and potentially translate that into something that can improve care to patients and efficiencies for practices.
Yep, totally agree. So diving into some innovation, can you tell us, how did you get started? When did you get started with innovation? And what made you want to do that?
Sure. I think, just to begin with, I would say that I've never really thought of myself as an innovator and more thought of myself as a problem solver. I've always been interested in making things work better and look at it from the lens of trying to make practical applications for or solutions for the problems that exist. So being labeled as an innovator is a somewhat kind of awkward situation where because I've never really thought of myself as an innovator. However, when I look back upon my career and I think based on some of the conversations that we've had in the past, I've realized I kind of fit in that box. For all intents and purposes, I would say that innovation kind of starts with a mindset. And I'm sure that as you've kind of gone through your process and as the audience have as well, there's always a moment in time where you have a great idea and it may be fleeting, and it's about trying to evolve it into something that's actually really tangible. And I would say that in my background in computer science, especially in the early '90s and late '80s, when I was really kind of full on into it, that was really an opportunity and an environment where everybody was doing anything and everything that they wanted, and it was all just kind of enshrined in code. That thought process has really transcended my career and really translated into some of my earlier innovations in medical school as a medical school student.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your first project that you worked on in med school.
Sure. I would say that the first project that really kind of started this journey was actually in the space of interventional radiology. And back then, interventional radiology was much more primitive and much less clinical. However, performing all these invasive procedures requires informed consent. And what I did was I used my coding background and created an early web-based patient consent program where essentially patients could go through a consent process in an automated fashion. You could log all of the information that they were collecting and also branch out through options menus into more detail, the morbid details associated with complications or potentially the statistics associated with outcome.
Like if you were doing a lung biopsy, for example, they could go into pneumothorax and then see the rates of a pneumothorax.
That's correct. Yes. So it kind of gave it kind of gave a patient an opportunity to empower themselves if they really wanted all the gory details. And back then, Dr. Google didn't exist, so it was really kind of meant to be a source of information.
Okay.
So I wrote this program, kind of created the database, put it on my zip drive, and some of you in the audience may know what that is, and took it to SCIVR, the Society of Cardiovascular and Interventional Radiology, which was the precursor to the SIR, and this was in 1997. I had to bring my CRT monitor, which was a 19-inch monitor, along with my massive brick CPU Pentium 4 computer, and put it in the middle of the poster displays. And we walked around the display area. It was the only computer there. So I left I left a little comments sheet for people to comment on it. And I still remember one to this very day. One of the comments said, "Great idea, but completely impractical because nobody has a computer and nobody knows how to use a computer."
Well, that would change very fast. But so this is important to highlight. You already had skills in computer science, correct?
Yes, I had a background in computer science and programming and some software engineering background too. So that's always really allowed me to take that moment of inspiration and look at solving the problem or making the or creating the solution in a stepwise fashion. And I think that that's kind of one of the common misconceptions is that the innovation eureka moment comes to you in toto.
Hmm.
But as many of the innovators in this series have probably have stated or probably feel, it's an iterative process, and really the innovation is one thing, but the execution is another skill set and another discussion altogether.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a process. It takes time. You earn the knowledge to improve it, to make it better. But I find it fascinating that you were in computer science in the '90s. That was, great predicting on your part. I think. I
Well,
think it.
it's funny you mentioned that because I have to be completely honest with you. I think I was actually the dumbest person out of all my friends in terms of computer science because I'm the one that decided to go into medicine. All my friends are now retired uh,
Yeah.
after riding the internet wave and the B2B wave and a
Yeah.
whole bunch of iterations. So it's not necessarily, I think, the choice, but I did follow my passion, which was medicine.
Oh, that's great. That's great. What a great story. So next, how did you kind of expand on your innovation experience from this project? What was number two? Like, where did you get involved? I assume, let's skip forward. Did you get involved with industry when you were out?
Sure. I think my involvement evolved over time. Medical school really taught me that I wanted to be in a space where I could use the skill sets I've had in computer science and try and find a brave new world of opportunities, not only just in terms of the diagnostic, but interventional side. So that's why I chose radiology as a specialty, because there was just so much fertile ground for exposure, evolution, and innovation. But through my residency, I realized that that innovation, at least in terms of the way that it shaped out in my career, really divided into three categories, and that's kind of how mentally I still see my contributions in terms of being able to create new things or solve problems. The areas that I realized that we really have strength in interventional radiology are in disease management, in technical refinement of procedures or techniques, and transformational technologies. And if you take a look at the cross section of what we do as IRs or as interventionalists as a whole, we actually touch on all three of these spaces. So through that experience, through my residency, I was really kind of looking at disease management and technical refinement because quite frankly, as a resident, let's be completely honest, nobody trusts you with something new or exciting.
Right.
With that in mind, during residency, I was looking at different projects or opportunities for disease management technical refinement through looking at hydrophilic coatings and, for instance, hepatobiliary intervention, in describing some of the techniques that we had used for management of iliofemoral DVT, in using ultrasound for trauma setting as a substitute for peritoneal sampling for those trauma and acute situations. And it kind of naturally evolved. I ended up doing some consulting for the Canadian military to teach them how to do fast ultrasounds. Ended up working with some companies with regards to clinical trials design. And from there, it just kind of led into fellowship, where I was fortunate enough to do my fellowship at Northwestern when a technique which was largely unknown, known as radioembolization, was just starting up in 2003. It was more of an evolution than really eureka moments, but certainly finding the opportunities wherever I was at the moment really created the fodder for exploration.
Well, I think that's a nice segue when you mentioned Y90. So you developed a dosing app for Y90. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Why did you do it? When did you do it? And what are the next steps for it?
So the app that I developed started off in 2015, and it's called DAVR, the Dosimetry and Activity Visualizer for Yttrium-90 Radioembolization. And it really stemmed from my experience of riding the hockey stick kind of exponential growth
Hmm.
and recognition and popularity of Y90. Back in the day, it was considered the pinnacle of interventional radiology to be able to have a Y90 program starting. Through my training, I was agnostic to the resin and glass wars, which many of the viewers or many of the listeners are aware of. But eventually, started working more closely with one of the companies and functioned as a medical director for that company. Realizing that dosimetry, which is kind of the geek out math part of Y90, was still very much a black box, but that individuals were treating with Y90 without a fulsome knowledge because of either the marketing or the influence or the discussions regarding the physics of dosimetry. I thought to myself, okay, let's democratize this concept. Let's try and create something that all users can use in order to understand the basic physics and leverage that out to optimal patient care. So it was literally just trying to make things work better from the lens of practical application. So the first iteration was an iPad app. Of course, when it first came out, I had a couple of my friends who were also performing Y90 look at it, and they were saying, wow, this is way too complicated. I don't understand what's going on. But after a couple of months and a couple of years, it slowly started to evolve. I realized that the unmet need was based on portability, so ported the app over to an Android and iOS version that could be used on Android phones and iPhones rather than the iPad, and then it really took off. Currently, it's the most popular dosimetry app used in the world. It has a user base of about 4,000 people. About 600 people use it regularly on a monthly basis, with over 2,000 sessions being used. So it really was kind of a testimony, I think, to addressing the unmet need in the user base. That being said, and perhaps we'll get into this later on, this was really, in my mind, in the category of innovation, not entrepreneurship, which is a different discussion altogether. However, at this point in time, even though it was a free app, there is a growing interest in terms of the commercial side. The app may actually go to a commercial point at some point in time, but it was never intended to do that.
No, that's great. I mean, it really does sound like you democratized it. And it sounds like it could potentially give a lot of IRs out there the confidence to do these procedures, and feel like they're getting the right dosing. So I feel like that's a really fantastic addition. I'm excited to see where it goes for sure. With that, I've seen that you've been on, you worked at Merit Medical, before you were on, the board. Is that correct?
That's right. I was honored enough to be invited on the board of directors of Merit Medical. Merit Medical is a MedTech device company that's based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a publicly traded on NASDAQ with a current market cap of, I believe, about 3.2 to $3.5 billion, depending on the day of the week and how good the market is at as treating it.
Right.
Um, it was a fantastic experience. It certainly was looking at the whole innovation cycle from a completely different perspective. But
You
during
were
that,
on the, sorry to interrupt, you were on the, finance committee. Is that correct?
that's correct. So I was on the board of directors, which was broken up into subcommittees. And the subcommittee that I was involved in was the finance committee, and that was the committee that was involved in looking at biz dev or business development, as well as the mergers and acquisition side of the business. So so-called inorganic growth opportunities that would be the business term is accretive to the bottom line.
Right. And can you explain that a little bit more for listeners who may not be familiar?
So if we break up medtech companies, there are kind of in various degrees of evolution. You have the startup space, where it's kind of a mad scramble to be able to get a product or a series of products along a certain intellectual property line or developmental pipeline to market. You have small cap, which is generally speaking, less than $1 billion in valuation, publicly traded. That is usually kind of a blip in the radar and may potentially undergo substantial or massive growth. You have mid cap, which is kind of like the middle child, where you're kind of trying to grow up, develop a larger base, but also maintain the loyalty and interest of the shareholders in the market. And then you have the large cap or strategics. Large caps and strategics are the multi-billion-dollar companies that you're very well aware of: the Medtronics, the Boston Scientifics, the Cook Medicals. So the finance committee within Merit Medical really existed within what's referred to as a mid cap company at the time, and our job was basically to identify companies, smaller companies that may have costs involved in certain aspects of their operations. Let's say something as mundane as accounting or logistics, or potentially look at the potential pull through. In other words, the synergies that would exist from a product or a device with the current offering of the company, and fold that into the company in order to increase the margin. And if we could find companies that were able to do that, in other words, strategically or technologically, that was what was referred to as an accretive acquisition. So it was something that we'd potentially bring in savings through having an HR department or accounting department, or having trucks that happen to deliver to the same hospital, or having an opportunity of a product device that has a margin that's higher than our current margin of the bottom line or the income statement, and acquire it through friendly acquisition, and then stretch out or amortize the revenue to the point where it actually adds to the company value.
Okay. So you said a lot of financial stuff there. So let me say, so accretive, basically, you're saying, if you can bring in a company or a product that will immediately add to the bottom line of Merit Medical. Whereas if it doesn't, say you acquired a startup because you just loved the product, but maybe they were running at they weren't making a profit at the time. Maybe they were running at a loss. They were just burning through investment dollars at that point. That would be a dilutive investment, correct?
That's correct. It's diluted because it's a deferred. It's basically you're deferring the potential income or bump based on an investment that's predicated on calculated risk.
Yes. So down the road, you're saying, so in 5 years, this may cost us money now, but in 5 years, we will recoup that plus more going forward.
That's absolutely right. And I think that was one of the big lessons that I learned looking at med tech and looking at the interventional space and medical device from this lens, in that in business, it's really about calculating risk and determining whether you have an appetite for it. And that's something very different than from my software engineering or software programming days, and certainly from the different from the perspective of the practice of medicine.
No, I think that's something that I think we really don't get a lot of exposure to as physicians, and it's something to think, for guys out there that are starting their own company. You really have to think how the strategic thinks, and you're giving us a chance to think about that right now. And if you're not thinking about are you going to be dilutive or accretive to the bottom line, then you're not necessarily thinking about what a strategic would care about.
Absolutely. You couldn't put it any better. When you look at a dilutive acquisition, it's about what the potential of this could be based on an assessment of the technology, the intellectual property, and the market space. When you're looking at an accretive, you're basically looking at how you can improve the bottom of the line. So oftentimes accretive acquisitions are either undervalued or kind of boring things. Things that we use on a day-to-day basis in which the cost basis or cost of manufacturing, delivery and logistics is fairly fixed. So you're slightly increasing margin. When you think about the, sexy new technologies that are transformative in what we do on a day-to-day basis, those are oftentimes quite expensive. And the valuation is based on future earning potential, not current potential. So it really is an investment based on calculated risk.
And which one is easier to get through a finance committee for an acquisition?
Well, the finance committee usually is a group of business managers, accountants, and bankers.
I think I know the answer.
Analysts.
Hold on. But yeah.
So there's so much to it that actually becomes, for lack of a better term, sterilized in terms of the excitement when you're just
Mm.
looking at a spreadsheet and plotting it out based on your projections. As you can tell, usually the accretive ones are the ones that are no brainers, and the dilutive ones are the ones that are really where you need to dig in and calculate out the market and the risk before investing.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important to understand for startups that are thinking about being acquired in the future, which you should be. I think you should be at least thinking about where your startup is going. For medical devices, they're often so expensive that you will often need a strategic partner. And we talked about that before in other episodes, but at least having an idea of the process that the committees use, I think can be helpful for them.
Absolutely. And the bottom line is that the process in which committees use, even in the situation of a dilutive acquisition, has more to do with the value relative to the de-risking of the investment. And by de-risking, what I mean is the following. As a startup, the longer you can run, the closer you can get to a regulatory threshold, let's say FDA approval, the more value you put into the company and invest, and therefore the multiple of the value then increases exponentially as you get across that line. So there are certain milestones that companies are looking for, and as you pass each milestone, the valuation or multiple of the valuation of your company increases. The very first milestone is intellectual property. If you kind of run up to a manager of a company, a sales manager with your tinfoil hat on, waving your hands in the air, telling them about this great device that's going to make $1 billion without actually having your ducks in a row, that really has no value. If you can develop some intellectual property, that certainly creates the intellectual through patents that creates a halo on a stack, which kind of at least sets up the guardrails a little bit. The proof of principle, the first animal, the first in man, the pivotal study, and the regulatory approvals are kind of other milestones that are met. And as you meet those milestones from the perspective of strategic, you are de-risking their investment. They can then look in the spreadsheet, have much less blank space in the spreadsheet in terms of their business projections, and therefore be more confident in the level of investment that they make.
That's key stuff right there. That's very important to understand, I think. So that's great. I think you clear. How long were you at Merit or on the board and finance committees?
I had a fairly short tenure. I was on for 3 years.
Okay. And that's considered short. Interesting. It feels like a decent amount of time. Okay. Tell us a little bit about some of the technologies that you are working on now. I know about NZ technologies and maybe imaging reality. If you could tell us a little bit about those.
Sure. NZ Technology was originally a project that I'd worked on with a engineer that was basically developing technologies using computer vision to detect rapid head movements in order to deploy airbags quicker in cars rather than the actual point of impact. This person was introduced to me from one of my former residents. His name is Bryan Hartley, who subsequently went down to Baptist and did his fellowship there. But he was an electrical engineer by background, and it's an interesting story because in the angio suite we don't really think much about it. But the next time you're in there, just take account of how many monitors, how many computers, keyboards, and interfaces you have in the room. So one day I was on call and I was working away, on a procedure in case, and Dr. Humayun comes in and he says, I have this really interesting idea based on the Microsoft Connect, which is that computer-aided vision kind of motion camera that Microsoft had developed. And I said, okay, well, let's see what you have. So I'm doing my procedure and I see Dr. Humayun jumping around like a monkey in the background, and I'm just thinking, okay, what's going on here? And what he was actually doing was using the Kinect to create gesture-based controls on a video game that was on his computer. He said, I'd like to see if we can do this in the Angio suite. So fast forward 5 years later, how we basically had developed a spin-off technology from the University of British Columbia and named it NZ Technology for Tumor Board, who's the electrical engineer, computer science and electrical engineer that started the company. And we embarked on this huge journey of trying to develop electronic PCBs, so printed circuit boards, custom computer vision cameras, to be able to unify control systems so that you could actually project a small laser projection of menu systems onto a patient and literally be able to have a contextual menu where you could touch the drape and that would activate a button. So you could do anything from ultrasound to IVUS to ablation to even controlling the C-arm systems. So as you know, and when any commercialization cycles, there are highs and lows. The highs are, of course, that we actually did develop a commercialized product that was starting to distribute and sell. The lows were the pandemic. Just when we were hitting our point of sales, the pandemic basically destroyed our ability or eliminated our ability to leverage out our sales and marketing team.
Hmm.
So the company, a startup, investment was all friends and family, and just kind of small capital investments was burning money pretty quickly. But Nima, Dr. Zaraknajad, had recognized the unmet need, which is in all places you'd never think of, was in elevators. So we have a hand gesture control system where you literally don't have to touch anything. It's touchless interaction. It basically detects based on capacitance and computer-aided vision. And he jerry-rigged this to work on an elevator system. And the next thing you know, one of the largest elevator distributors in the world is now licensing the product and incorporating into their installs for new condos and new buildings, but also developing a retro kit so that older elevator systems can incorporate this technology where you literally don't have to touch a button and you can just wave your finger in front of the button and have the floor button activated.
That's an incredible pivot, I would say. That's an incredible pivot going from medicine to elevators, but it really is all still healthcare. If I had to say, I think that's the reason why the clinical need was there in the first place, was because of the pandemic. Nobody wanted to touch an elevator button. It's just one way of reducing risk.
Absolutely. And certainly I would say that the amount of enthusiasm and interest from this technological twist really was really quite exciting and very quick. Labeling something as military grade or medical grade and translating into a commercial product or a consumer-based product is actually a very powerful message. Because it really means, especially to investors as well as to end users, that this technology has been pressure tested in the most extreme environments. And certainly that added to the narrative because there were a number of competitive companies out there that were doing, I would say, similar use cases, but really didn't have the credentials to say that they had extreme conditions in which this has been tested, validated, and utilized.
No, that's an awesome story. Now tell us about a little bit about imaging reality.
I guess we're pivoting out to video games.
Yeah.
So Imaging Reality is a company that I became involved in based on a friend of mine who is a veterinarian at the Vancouver Aquarium. He had a benefactor at the aquarium, philanthropist, who is a legend in video game programming. So for any of you that had a Nintendo and played any of the Electronic Arts sports games in the late 90s and early 2000s, this person, Eric Kiss, probably wrote them. And as a result of all of his work in the video game industry, he became an expert in graphics processing and rapid processing. And he decided to explore areas in virtual reality and was looking for a use case. So we have DICOM images, we have multi-slice CTs, we have MRs with multiphasic imaging, and he has a pair of VR goggles. So over the next couple of years, we embarked on a project of developing a virtual reality holodeck type system where you can literally put on the VR goggles along with 1 or 4,000 people and go into a space and look at volumetric data acquired from a CT or an MR and be able to see it with multiple other studies and multiple other people in various forms to create a collaborative space for preoperative planning, for consultation, and also for learning and teaching.
That's great. Like Tumor Board, I can see that being great between institutions. And so, what is your role with both of these? I mean, are you using any of your technical background for this, or I know you have a lot of finance background because you were on the merit board. I'm just curious, and also obviously the clinical background. I'm just curious what do you find yourself bringing more to these companies?
Sure. And I think that's actually a really interesting point, and a really interesting question because after my experiences in the past working with CDL, working at a number of different organizations and processes, I realized that no company or major research or developmental work can really be willed into reality by one person alone. And the opportunity that we have as interventionalists, kind of crossing that chasm or building the bridge between clinical application slash use case and the technology or technological know-how isn't that I'm the most brilliant finance person or the most brilliant engineer or frankly the most brilliant physician, but it's the ability to be able to think and see from the perspective of each of the lenses from business, from the engineering side, and from medicine that really states my value proposition because I can speak the languages and really be able to create synergies between the different disciplines. So, as an example, with Enza Tech, from the academic side, I've written papers about the optimization and saving of time and also the decreased potential for infectious transmission using hand gesture based models instead of walking out, taking off your gloves, and playing with a mouse. But then strategically, I also have a computer science and engineering background, so I can start translating the clinical need into engineering processes, in which then can translate into an end product. With Enza Technologies, which is obviously another technology company, my value proposition is being able to identify the use cases within our day-to-day clinical flow and looking at it from the perspective of where the knowledge gaps are. Because when you're in clinic and you're busy, you're basically just a lemming kind of following along everybody else and just trying to survive. And oftentimes you kind of miss the gap of where you could make things better or have a practical application and improvement to your flow. So I truly believe that the opportunities that have been afforded to me have to do with the fact that I try and look at any sort of problem or use case from these different lenses.
That is a very good point. You can't be one track if you're in an early startup. Your hat will change from day to day to day, and you have a unique background because you have technical skills along with your clinical and then the finance as well. I think that's something that a lot of people don't have. Those all of those things may have parts, but that's why it's so important to have a team as well.
Absolutely. And as I was referencing earlier, I think that the concept of innovation and entrepreneurship are two different skill sets. And it's very, very rare to find an individual or even two individuals that actually carry strengths in both of those arenas. So that's kind of where having this sense of collaboration, knowing where you need to go in your next step rather than just waving your hands in the air, trying to attract attention about an innovation that you have, really is key to the success and long-term viability of any invention or idea that you have.
Yeah, and segueing a little bit into, you mentioned CDL before, or the Creative Destruction Lab. Tell me what your role is with that and kind of your mentorship that goes on as well as in your biomedical engineering department.
Sure. Well, Destruction Lab is essentially an incubator, and as with other organizations like the Biodesign or BioX processes, essentially what it is it's a collection of people that work within a specific space from different disciplines and different stages that help or assist in mentoring early startup companies through the valley of death. In terms of the entrepreneurial cycle, there is a phase called the Valley of Death, where essentially it's usually about 18 months to 4 years in, where you're running out of money, you have a mad scramble, and all hands are on deck. And if you can survive that, generally speaking, you are then blessed with investment, with mentorship, and potentially more encouraging support, either through strategics through their capital, their marketable securities investments, or support along those lines. So what CDL is designed to do is trying to either shorten or eliminate that valley of death, as with many incubators, with an understanding that the participation is in goodwill. In other words, you're just trying as a mentor, whether you're a scientist, a finance, or a business person, with an understanding that there may be a return on investment later on, but you're really passing it forward. It's not about immediate investment. It's not about being parasite. It's not about being an aggressive or predatory investor, but just seeing if companies can make it across that line. And when they do, you can potentially help them either financially or through your know-how to take them to the next level.
And can you give me an example of maybe of one of the projects you're kind of helping out with now?
Well, the one thing about CDL, unfortunately, is that CDL, it's kind of like Vegas. What stays, what happens at Vegas stays in Vegas, and what happens at
Okay.
CDL is supposed to stay in CDL. But certainly, anybody who's interested can go onto the website and take a look at some of the success stories
Okay.
through the process. I apologize, but
No,
even amongst friends, I have to keep that
of course.
private.
Yeah, your 2,000 closest friends that will hear this. So tell me, what about the biomedical engineering school? You're working on some projects there, mentoring, correct?
Yeah, that's actually been a very interesting and exciting endeavor. I've half joked to people that it's the best demotion that I've ever had, because I was a clinical professor in the Faculty of Medicine before being demoted to an associate professor in the School of Biomedical Engineering.
Uh-huh.
But the School of Biomedical Engineering is essentially like many other schools of engineering, with a focus on two areas: on physiologic/cellular therapies, which I personally believe, as interventionalists, is a huge arena in which we can really conduct and perform precision therapeutics, and then the classic med tech side. So essentially, I have a lab that I've started up, and it's referred to as the MIPS lab, the minimally invasive image guided procedure lab. That now is basically act not only as a beacon for graduate students who realize that with my credentials that I'm looking at things from the innovation space with the lens of commercialization outlet, but also has created a focal point for public-private partnerships with other organizations and startup companies within British Columbia who really need the technological know-how and the credentials of university support to be able to be supported through federal grant programs. We're spanning kind of all aspects of it with grants in the domain of external non-invasive therapeutic microwave, of low-cost AI-driven robotic interventional systems and for image-guided procedures, and other types of technical devices like a ferrofluid driven actuator that can create tiny microcatheters that can steer or be able to supply therapeutics through a rotary system. The list is really quite long, but the most exciting part about it is that people, organizations, companies, research groups are collaborating with me with ideas that I would have thought were completely impossible or just outside of my realm of understanding, and really being challenged with the opportunity to learn about these and find the practical application.
Oh, that sounds like a blast. So let me ask the question. With your clinical practice, do you think that your innovation work helps your clinical practice and vice versa? I'm just curious, how do the two work together? How do they live together? What's the symbiosis? Do you feel better about your clinical practice because you've got these projects going on simultaneously? Does it kind of make the day maybe go a little bit better, a little bit faster? You're a little bit more energized? I'm just curious.
Well, I think as with anything, once you start going down the treadmill and doing the same thing for too long, it becomes mundane and a job. And I can honestly say that with my involvement in CDL in the School of Biomedical Engineering at University of British Columbia in my clinical practice, that it never feels that way. Because I have to think differently when I'm thinking about each of these, different facets, but that doesn't mean that they're exclusive and binned. Just to kind of put it another way, and I know I made an allusion to it earlier. The way I see it and the way I explain it to people who ask is the following: in medicine, we are trained to avoid risk at all costs in the practice of clinical medicine. I think it's perfectly understandable. You don't want to hurt somebody or be a cowboy or go to the extreme. In engineering, you tackle risk as a problem and accept failure as a higher likelihood than success. So you just kind of get up and you do it again and again and again. So that's the iterative part of engineering. In business, you're constantly calculating risk and making a commitment based on that determined risk. And for me, being able to kind of stretch my brain to think differently, whether it's in a procedure, whether it's thinking about what technique or what devices I'm going to use, or clinical research, I find that blending all three of these, allows me to think not only laterally but deeper for problem sets that other people may not have thought of as a problem, or identifying unmet needs that haven't really been truly understood.
And that keeps you energized, you think? Do you think you would have the same passion if you didn't have these, I'm not going to call them side projects because they're all full projects, but side to your clinical career?
Absolutely. Because even simple things like a PICC line, or, heaven forbid, I have to do an NG tube or a biopsy. Now I think about it differently. Whenever I run into something that is a problem, a challenge, or an inconvenience, I'm now putting on the engineering hat to see how I can make it better, or potentially the entrepreneurial slash business hat to see if there's actually an opportunity or a space for innovation to translate into an entrepreneurial outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense to me. And I'm kind of leading the witness, but would you recommend this to our listeners if they have an interest in innovation? Say they've come up with an idea, would you recommend that they start knocking those dominoes down and pursuing this out in parallel to maybe their clinical career?
Well, I think that's actually a really good question, and the answer is yes. As interventionalists, whether you're cardiology, gastroenterology, interventional, vascular, we all are trying to think on the fly and really using technology and devices to advance our practice, along obviously with the learned skills. I think to be able to level set expectation, hopefully in this innovation series, the listeners have really had a better appreciation for the fact that innovation is a cycle. The inspiration is that moment in time, but innovation is a cycle and it takes time. And just to bear in mind that everything takes longer than you expect, is more expensive than you think would be, and has more challenge than you initially anticipated. But the end can be very rewarding. That reward may not be entrepreneurial, but the reward may be kind of internalized as doing a better job, or treating a patient better, or being more efficient. So if I think the listeners or viewers are thinking about innovation as being inextricably bound to commercial outlet and entrepreneurship, that's not necessarily the case. I believe that innovation really is predicated by inspiration, which is really about thinking about everything you do and really finding those opportunities to improve.
That's fantastic. I don't want to end it there, but I think that's such a great place. And if I could try to say a few summary points, and please correct me if some of this is wrong. So it's very clear from that last point, and you said this at the beginning. In the beginning, you just said make things work better. That's how you got into innovation. You weren't trying to be an entrepreneur. You just had a thirst for solving problems and making things better. And one thing led to the next. The snowball got bigger and bigger. And that's how you end up being an innovator. A lot of times. I think that's a great road to go down. Next is, many people have ideas. It's really about evolving that into something tangible. You had a technical side that allowed you to create a minimum viable product on some of these things. And once you see a little bit of success, I'm putting this on you now. Once you see a little bit of success with a prototype, it really gives you the confidence to keep going. And I loved hearing about that. And I think it's so important to pursue your idea at the beginning, even if it's taking one step or two steps, because it will give you the confidence to keep going. Next, business is calculating risk. You mentioned you have to think like a strategic. You have to know what they think about. Are they thinking about your product is accretive is to their bottom line? Is it dilutive? What will your impact be to them? And more importantly, also as a startup, you need to know that your milestones, achieving milestones, will raise the value of your startup. Going from your intellectual property, getting that filed, prototype, animal studies, first in human, getting through regulatory approval. What you're doing is de-risking the company as you move along. You're de-risking it from a strategic standpoint, which absolutely raises your value. And finally, stretch your brain to think differently. That's what you said. So having these side projects and innovation for clinicians can really keep you excited. And not only that, it can help you problem solve even small clinical issues. You're going to start to put on your engineering hat or your problem solving hat. And it really can keep things interesting and exciting as you move through, where no problem is too small. Would you add anything to that?
No, I think you've provided a wonderful summary to the listeners. And certainly I wish everybody well in the future. And hopefully everybody is encouraged to find that inspiration and innovate from that inspiration.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dave. We really appreciate having you on and sharing your experience and your passion.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.